The worst outcome for everyone in the region, including India, is the collapse of the regime. No one in the region wants a collapse of the regime. A collapse of the regime means that we are going to lose the Iranian oil for a longer period, which means that higher energy prices anyway. It is not in the interest of Iran to close the Hormuz Strait. And the Hormuz Strait was closed by the insurance companies that are aligned with the richest of the rich in the world. The longer this continues, the higher the price of almost everything. So you want to talk about oil, you want to talk about LNG, you want to talk about NGLs, you want to talk about naphtha, any of that products, you want to talk about fertilizers or anything else. Big countries like China, India, Japan, South Korea can mitigate the impact. They can handle the pressure. They can, governments are rich, basically. They can subsidize the population if prices go up. Why does India, a great country like India, need a permission from President Trump or his government, basically, to buy Russian oil?
Hello and welcome back to the Hindustan Times podcast. I'm your host Shashank Matu, reporting to you today from San Francisco. We've seen, of course, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent announce a decision to grant India a 30-day waiver to purchase Russian energy, this coming as a reversal to the administration's previous decision to pressure India to end its purchases of Russian energy. You might remember that that was a key part of the India-US trade agreement that was announced a month ago by the US administration as well as by the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What is behind this reversal of positions by the US administration? Is it the conflict in Iran that is driving this decision by the US administration? Joining us now to decode this is one of the foremost experts in the energy and geopolitics space today, Dr. Anas Alhajji. Dr. Alhajji, thank you so much for joining us on the Hindustan Times podcast. Could you begin? You have been tracking India's purchases of energy from Russia, the US pressure that has been placed for India to cut purchases of energy from Russia. Could you tell us how you see this decision by the US to issue this 30-day waiver to India to buy Russian energy?
This waiver is kind of very sad or reflects a very sad situation on two fronts. The first front is, why does India, a great country like India, need a permission from President Trump or his government, basically, to buy Russian oil?
Right.
Okay. So that's number one. Number two, supposedly the war is going to be over very soon. We were told that the Iranian Navy being destroyed, and the situation in the Gulf should be resolved quickly, and President Trump is going to provide insurance and he's going to provide kind of security to the ships going through the Hormuz Strait. So why allowing India to get the Russian oil if the situation is going to be resolved? So it's sad that India needs that permission, and it is sad because it is an indication that the situation is not going to be resolved. And I'm not talking only about the war. I'm talking about the situation in the Hormuz Strait. We know that President Trump is against low oil prices. We know that he's been like this for a very long time, even before he was a president.
Right.
So why? What's behind the idea that we got to accept the fact that we got to go through a period of high oil prices, something that he fought for or fought against for a very long time?
Right. Could you begin by explaining the implications of something like this? We saw, of course, over the last couple of months that some Indian purchases of crude oil, especially from Russia, have declined because of the fact that the United States had unveiled these sanctions against companies like Rosneft and Lukoil. So Indian companies like Reliance, for their refineries in places like Jamnagar, were buying a lot of energy from Russian companies like Rosneft. They ceased those purchases because of American sanctions. So do we expect that over the next 30 days, just to clarify, that those sanctions that were put in place last year by the US Treasury will be suspended for those 30 days? Is that what we're seeing?
In a sense, we don't know exactly what all it means. Basically, that there are some oil tankers near India that are Russian or carrying Russian oil, and then India is allowed to get them. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's kind of funny if you think about it. India never stopped buying the Russian crude.
Mhm.
And the data about 1 or 1.1 million barrels, these are the kind of the apparent data,
Mhm.
that 1.1 million barrels imports. But I track these things all the time, and I can tell you, we've seen those Russian ships coming to Oman,
Mm.
and then within a day or two, they are going back to Russia. So where did that oil go?
Right.
And the distance between them and the Indian ports basically is very short. So we know that the India refiners are buying that Russian oil in the dark market anyway, and they are buying it at a discount anyway. But the issue right now is for India and for the world is not the permission to India to buy the Russian crude.
Mhm.
The issue is, what does it mean for the Hormuz Strait? It means that this situation is going to continue, and that is uh, very destructive to the world economy, destructive to the economy of India and everything else. And all the situation can be solved easily if they want to solve it
Mhm.
by
Right.
calling the EU and telling them to suspend the uh, segments in the law. There is certain segment in the law, in the insurance law. If they suspend that for a month,
Mhm.
just a month, they can solve the problems immediately.
Right.
Why they are not doing it? So there are some serious issues here, because the issue is really with the European law on one side and the insurance companies on the other, that decided to cancel the insurance policies on the tankers, and the tankers got stuck. So why this is not being dealt with? Why do we have to go the other way to solve the problems, while we can solve this problem heads on just by telling the EU to do these things?
Right. Could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Alhajji, about how you're seeing the initial reaction to what has happened over the last week since the US-Israeli strikes on Iran? I think that people have been so focused on the geopolitics of the whole thing and the military action of the whole thing, that the energy side of what has happened has only just started to come in. So if to an Indian audience, could you explain what has happened really over the last week in energy markets that has...
Generally speaking, India depends heavily on imports of several things from the Gulf. And that's natural because they are neighbors. So that's really natural. There is nothing wrong with that. But we got fixated with the idea of oil and gas, and we forgot about other things. For example, fertilizers. India depends heavily on fertilizers, and it depends heavily on fertilizers from the Gulf. So whether you want to talk about urea, or you want to talk about potash or anything else, the more than 25% of the imports of India of fertilizers come from the region, and that is blocked. And we are coming into a planting season in India. So that's number one. Number two, India produces fertilizers within India. The problem is those fertilizers come from NGLs and gas that comes from the Gulf. So even domestic production of fertilizers is going to be reduced. So how India is going to deal with this situation when it comes to the agricultural sector? This is a serious problem. So it's not only about oil and gas. There are too many things there. And why we did not see pressure from India on President Trump basically to help open the strait so ships can move on.
Right.
It's not about only oil and gas. There are more to the story than this. And probably in the next week or so, we are going to hear plenty of stories in India about the massive impact. And I hope people will realize that Iran did not close the Hormuz Strait. And it is not in the interest of Iran to close the Hormuz Strait. And the Hormuz Strait was closed by the insurance companies that are aligned with the richest of the rich in the world.
Could you tell us something, Dr. Alhaji, about how you see the market evolving now in the days to come? Because we've seen some increase in the price of oil and gas. As you say, there has been a lot of jitters among global insurance companies that underwrite global shipping as a whole. How does that impact the global economy? Because again, if you look at the statement that Scott Bessent put out, the Secretary of the Treasury from the United States, he said that Again, he blamed Iran specifically for disrupting global shipping. And he's also basically gone and said that, look, we need to restore stability to global oil flows, which again shows that the Treasury Department is fairly concerned about the stability of oil prices globally. Talk to us a little bit about that, about how you see things going.
The longer this continues, the higher the price of almost everything. So you want to talk about oil, you want to talk about LNG, you want to talk about NGLs, you want to talk about naphtha, any of that products, you want to talk about fertilizers or anything else. The longer this lasts, the worse the problems and the higher the price. The problem we are seeing right now is that big countries like China, India, Japan, South Korea can mitigate the impact. They can handle the pressure. They can, governments are rich, basically. They can subsidize the population if prices go up. But we are forgetting the poorer countries that are going to have serious problems. If you talk about Bangladesh, for example, you talk about Pakistan, you talk about Vietnam, and then you start talking about the smaller countries in Asia. You talk about the Philippines. Those countries are going to suffer greatly, something that is worse than the period of COVID, because of all the things that are taking place. And it seems no one, even the media, is not even doing its job covering these issues. These are historic issues. This is a historic event, and the price is going to be paid mostly by the poorest in the world. Even if you extend that to Africa, for example, this is going to affect Egypt, this is going to affect Kenya, it's going to affect South Africa, etc. So this is a worldwide problem, and the ripple effect basically is felt in the closer countries because of the smaller distance and the just the short distance. But the ripple effect is widening and widening as it goes throughout the world.
Right, sir. You mentioned that. So let me ask you, Dr. Alhajji, to expand on that argument, because you said in your first answer that the sign that this waiver has been issued shows that we're not going to see an end to these hostilities in the next couple of days or couple of weeks, that this is a sign that America intends to continue hostilities against Iran. I've seen the opposite argument also be made on social media, that the idea that this is a temporary waiver shows that, look, the US is not interested in going into an all-out conflict with Iran. Could you have sought that out? Because as you say, if this conflict goes on, the price of energy rises, that hits India, that hits countries in the region, that hits the poorest in the world. Talk to us a little bit about that. What is the signal that this waiver sends? If you could talk to that a little bit as well.
If you want to delve kind of deeper into this, you got to think about it this way. Okay, what does Trump want, or Trump and Netanyahu wants from Iran? Okay, if they want regime change and there is no substitute, that means we are talking about the collapse of the country. We are talking about the collapse of the regime. The worst outcome for everyone in the region, including India, is the collapse of the regime. No one in the region wants the collapse of the regime. If you look at Pakistan, basically, they are afraid of the Baluch and what happened to the militants in Balochistan. If you look at Afghanistan, they have problems with some minorities there. They don't want that. If you look at Turkey, they don't want the Kurds to be militants and they don't want to fight with the Kurds. Then you have to remember that Iran has more than 90 million people. If you have a collapse of the regime, and then we start having that revenge killing and all this stuff, then we are going to see massive migration. And that migration is going to be over all the places: India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkey, and the Arab countries. No one wants that. But if you go to the Iranians and see where they want to go, mostly they want to go to Western Europe. The only way they can go to Western Europe is through Turkey, and Turkey does not want that. So no one in the region wants a collapse of the regime.
Understood.
So the question is now, what is next? And a collapse of the regime means that we are going to lose the Iranian oil for a longer period, at which means that higher energy prices anyway. And then if you are talking about the collapse of the regime, we are going to end up with those loose groups from Iraq, Yemen, other places in the Gulf, who are angry because of what happened, and they are going to act on their own. And that is another dangerous problem, because when several young men basically act on their own, the intelligence basically does not know who are they. We don't know who are they. We don't know anything. And technology has advanced so much in the last 15 years. All you need just $500 to buy certain equipment, basically to wreak havoc on an oil facility or a tanker or anything else.
Right.
So
So you see the possibility of increased instability in the Middle East after this?
Oh, big time. If we have a collapse of the regime, basically, so terrorism is going to increase, and that is another problem. So what is the end game here? And that's why if you start working this through, you can see how energy prices are going to continue going up unless we find a resolution as soon as possible.
Right. Dr. Alhajji, I'll just end with 2 or 3 questions. The first one was, of course, what I started asking you in the beginning, which is that is this a dramatic reversal of position for the Americans? Because for the last couple of months, the idea was they would put pressure and pressure and pressure on India to stop buying Russian energy. India's argument is always that, look, we began buying Russian energy because it was the argument of the Biden administration that purchasing Russian oil would help maintain stability in global oil prices. The Trump administration wasn't interested in that. Now you see Scott Bessent putting out a statement that actually, in order to maintain global oil price stability, we will allow India to purchase Russian energy. Is that just a stunning reversal of position, a validation of the argument that India has already
First of all, if you think about the idea itself, it does not make any sense. So the idea here is, okay, don't buy 2 million barrels from Russia because you are killing Ukrainians. So just go ahead and buy 1 million so you can kill lesser Ukrainians. I mean, it's killing anyway. So the whole idea does not make any sense if you start thinking about it. The idea of India eliminating dependence on Russian oil is impossible. There is no way they can import because there are no substitutes anyway, even without the crisis in the Gulf. So the argument does not make any sense. India cannot get rid of the Russian oil. That's the second one. And the third one is people are ignoring the fact of crude quality. India refiners need certain quality of crude that comes from Russia. U.S. oil does not match that quality. So if you increase imports from the United States to compensate for that, it does not make any sense because it's not going to compensate. So you can switch something from Saudi Arabia or others when you buy light crude from those countries, you can switch it with American crude. But you cannot replace the Russian crude with U.S. crude of the same quality because it is not the same quality. So there are too many problems with the whole thing. And we know that the issues are not really related to Russian crude. The United States, until today, imports enriched uranium from Russia and pay them for it. The EU imports that. Turkey imports a lot of oil, petroleum products, natural gas from Russia, and they export more to Europe than India, and no one said anything. So why India? It's not the issue. The imports from Russia are not the issue. There are other issues, mostly related to the agricultural sector. It's related to the massive market in India for products, etc. It has nothing to do with imports from Russia. Right. So let's get rid of this idea that we get fixated on the idea of it's Russia. It has nothing to do with Russia. Because if the United States is serious about it, why the United States still importing things from Russia?
Right. Now, can I ask you then, Dr. Alhajji, is this just a sign of very little strategic thinking coming out of Washington, putting a pressure on India to stop purchasing Russian energy, then saying, okay, no, now you can purchase Russian energy because we've gone and started a war with Iran that we initially said that we didn't want in the first place? Is this just evidence of a lack of strategic thinking on the side of the Americans?
The idea here is there are two parts to the idea. The first part of the idea that India needs the oil that lost in the Gulf. And they are going to put pressure on the Trump administration because they said, look, you did not tell us this. You told us it will be a clean war, there will be no impact, etc. And now we are impacted. This is going to increase prices, it's going to cause inflation, this is going to destroy our economy, etc. So from that point of view, Trump has no other choice but to provide a substitute. And what is the substitute? The readily available Russian oil near the India refineries. It's that simple, and that's it. The other related issue is that even if the Trump administration does not give that waiver, we already know that refiners basically are getting that Russian oil in the dark market anyway. So India will get it anyway. And if the U.S. administration gets mad at India, they'll tell them, look, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to have my economy collapse because of your policies. I need the oil.
Right. And could I ask you then one final question in terms of, to resolve the situation going forward, what is it that you would like to see India do diplomatically, along with partners in the Gulf, to, let's say, have the easy?
This is a long story because I've been following India for over 25 years, and there are a lot of things that India need to do, and one of them is, I know they are working on some storage facilities so they can increase their strategic petroleum reserves. Okay, but if you look at the size of the Indian economy now, and you look at the size of the Indian economy by 2050, you need to do multiples of what they are doing right now. So they need to build massive strategic petroleum reserve to match the size of the economy and the growth that is happening. So that's number one. Number two, they need to create everything they import. Basically, they need to create it in a portfolio within a portfolio idea. The portfolio basically will have two objectives. You need to minimize risk at the lowest cost. And the problem is there were times when the risk basically increased substantially for the sake of getting a lower price. And that does not make sense, because if you hear the reality of those purchases, by the way, the same oil, the same tankers, the same of everything, India would have bought it at $20 less than what's paying today. So they need to create those portfolios for oil and LNG so they can minimize the risk and at the lowest cost, and that will help them out. The idea of always looking for the lowest cost basically is causing some of those problems.
Understood. Dr. Anas Alhajji, one of the world's most respected experts on energy and geopolitics, talking to us about the crisis in Iran, the strategy or the lack of it from the United States and Israel, and how that impacts India, but also poor countries around the world that are watching as the rising price of oil because of this conflict threatens to eviscerate their economies. Dr. Alhajji, thank you so much again for joining us on the Hindustan Times podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.